Hi, and welcome to the Spiritual Intelligence Briefing. I'm John Redenbow, and we have Pastor Dana Coverstone here with us as well. And we're talking about the very first video that Dana had that he released is about June 24th of 2020. And it included a dream from December of 2019, June 22nd, and June 23rd of 2020. And this is about the third or fourth podcast we're doing related to these dreams. We call it the Brace Yourself dossier. But right now we're about halfway through dream 3, and dream 3 is, to me, it's groundbreaking. Just the information that is being presented through dream 3, the things that we're learning about the upcoming election. If you haven't watched dream 3 part 1, please go back and watch that, because you'll kind of be lost. You'll feel like we're starting in the middle. We read the dream at the beginning of the last session. We're not going to read it again for this one, but we're just going to jump right in, and hopefully you've watched the first video. So this is dream 3 part 2. So now the last thing that we talked about in the last session that we did was we were talking, Dana, about the coins and about how the local bank president said there's no pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, half dollars. And then we went into who was on the face of all of those pieces of coins and what their legacy was related to the country. And we tied that back into the sign that you saw on the bank when you walked in that said no change available. And it was the idea that if certain people represented by the local bank president and by the secretary, if those type of people got elected, the change that was the legacy of these great men that are on the coins, that's the kind of change that we would no longer see in the country. So did you have any more thoughts on that?
Having the dreams and looking back on them, and there's not a day that goes by I don't think about one of the dreams, or I think about something involved in some of those dreams. And you brought out things that I never would have thought of or connected. And so the more that I connect, every time now that I walk into a business or in the airports and I see, due to a national coin shortage, every time I see those signs, it's both humbling, and I kind of smile to myself and I think, wow. And I saw that, and not in a prideful way, but that's like watching a dream come true in all reality. And for me, it just confirms, it helps confirm that, yes, okay, God, you showed me something. Because I've had plenty of reasons to doubt, plenty of reasons to think, did I really see this? Well, when I walk in those places and I see those signs, there's no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that it was part of a dream that I had and that I saw coming, and I put on video. It's out there, And so it connects me back to the fact that God is still giving people dreams. That Acts chapter 2 is coming to pass, and that we should expect that. That should be an expected part of our Christian experience, and especially in the last days where we are right now, I believe, where we're starting to see things happen that are typical of what was in Matthew 24 and the warnings of Jesus, and when you begin to see these signs, these things. So we should expect an explosion and an outpouring, not just of the Spirit, but an outpouring of dreams and visions, prophetic words. And even within, I'm Assemblies of God. I want to see more of these things within the Assemblies of God. We've not been real open to the full fivefold ministry. We say we are, and I'm not coming against our movement by any means. But I can't name very few prophets in the Assemblies of God. I can't name very many apostles in the Assemblies of God. Pastors and evangelists, oh yeah, I know them. But even within the Assemblies of God, how many dreamers are there? How many people are having dreams like this? So I'm hoping that this opens the door for God to move in a powerful way in the Assemblies of God, because I want to see a great outpouring of the Spirit. And so if it means a dream about coins that you're able to pull stuff from that nobody else is seeing, I think that's amazing how God works. We talked earlier about you and I are kind of like a team. I had the dream and I have some understanding of it, but you pull the historical aspects out that I wouldn't have connected. And because of that, you see the connection with the coins and with former heads of state, former secretaries of state, former leaders, and it makes the dream even more prolific and interesting to look at. Because I when you first sent me that dossier, I thought, this thing is 36 pages. How in the world did you get 36 pages out of these 3 dreams? But then when I began to see the time you put into it and the connections you were making, I thought, man, there's a whole lot more here than I even dreamed of or thought of could be there. So I think it's important, like what you're doing. You're unpacking this and explaining the symbols and what those symbols mean. And that's going to be a necessary importance for people to understand how to interpret this dream correctly. So I appreciate the time you're spending there doing this.
Well, I appreciate you taking the risk and sharing your dreams with the world, and know you've paid a price to do that, and you've been misunderstood by a lot. But I think at the end of the day, it's bringing a lot of things, even in the prophetic community, those that are used to being in the prophetic community. We're starting to see a lot of people talk about the dark horses, about change and reformation that needs to come to the prophetic community. And I even saw a post or two today where people are just so hungry for more depth than what they call the Facebook prophets, people that just put an encouraging word or a quip on Facebook all the time. And, and I think there's definitely a part of the prophetic that to me is more like encouragement or exhortation, that there is a message that people have to be positive and to be, kind of short and succinct in encouraging words. I think that that's important. And with all the negativity in the world, I'm glad that there's people that are doing things like that. But I think when it comes to really being able to have the kind of prophetic words that we saw in the Bible, and knowing that there's a massive difference between the gift of prophecy and the gift of dream interpretation, but having it, my desire and hunger is to have a company of people that have it at the level of standing before kings. That if or when the president of the United States calls and says, I've had a dream and I need to understand what it means because it's related to, foreign policy or this or that. I know, and I've heard some stories of people having influence like that in the life of this current president based on visions and dreams that God has given them. And it's changed policy. It's changed things in our country. A lot of those are unfortunately stories that I can't really go into. But we'll have examples and we'll begin to see there's dreams that other people have had that were direct advisors to people in very high places that I've interpreted dreams for that have come true in their own lives. So that's the level that I want to see. And I think when God takes the time to craft a message and to deliver it to somebody like you and to wake you up in the middle of the night with your Fitbit at 180 and, you're kind of freaking out like, what the heck does this mean? I think it's definitely a worthy time expenditure to go through and if you're called to that, which I am, and to find not just the base level, well, here's what it means or here's what it doesn't mean, or even worse yet, here's just a response. There's a lot of responses to the dream. We don't need a response. What we need an interpretation, and an accurate interpretation. Just like Pharaoh said to Joseph, what does this mean? And here's the symbols, here's what the dream means, and now here's what you should do. And responding without an interpretation, it's like, again, I see it as you get a letter on a blank envelope that has your name on it, and you begin to smell it, and you look at it, and you look at the writing on the outside, and you judge, well, I don't like it because it's a dark envelope, and I think it looks like a bill, and it makes me afraid, so I'm just going to throw it away. So people don't get the interpretation. They just immediately discard it based on how they feel when they get the unopened message. And I think it's so critical because, as you've said, God is pouring out his spirit. There's been multiple articles in CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, New York Post, Wall Street Journal, all over the gamut of how dreams have picked up in, this year in the midst of COVID. And we have a promise in Ecclesiastes. It says, when the mind is troubled, dreams come.
Yes.
A lot of people think that means a pizza dream. That means like, well, if
Mm.
my mind is focused on the bad news that I just watched on TV and I go to sleep and I dream about a pandemic, then maybe I shouldn't watch enough news. No, that's absolutely 100% wrong.
Right.
Misinterpreting what that means. What that means is if you are troubled, why wouldn't God want to speak to you during that time? And
Yeah.
if what you're focusing on is the headlines, why wouldn't God want to speak to you about the headlines? I know I put it in the dossier and we didn't get into a lot of the teaching moments related to the dreams. But one of the things I said is Joseph in the Bible had 6 dreams that he interacted with, 2 that he had, 2 that the baker and the cupbearer had, and then 2 that Pharaoh had. Out of those 6 dreams, 5 of them were related to agriculture. Joseph was a farmer and a rancher. So God was not only speaking to him, but speaking to the people that brought dreams to him in a language that he as an interpreter would understand. So I
Hmm.
think that that is so critical and so important that if you're a person that's taken an interest in national level affairs, like you and I both have, you keep up on politics, you watch the news without absorbing all of the negativity, but you're looking at the headlines to see what's being reported, to see what the big events of the day are, that those are the things that you care about and God cares about what we care about. So he's going to
Yeah.
speak to us about the things that we care about, which we have clearly seen in the dreams that he's given you.
And one aspect about that too is that a lot of people don't realize is I read the news through the grid of Scripture. That's my filter. And I'm not looking for the craziest thing about the Democrats, Republicans. I'm looking for how does this apply to biblical timelines? How does this apply? Right now, Israel, Syria, and Lebanon are having massive amounts of fires. There's been death and evacuations. I found that in the Jerusalem Post. I also find it interesting. Those 3 countries are on fire while 3 states in our nation are having incredible fires. You don't think about, when's the last time you heard of Israel having a fire?
Yeah.
Or Lebanon having a fire, or Syria? Yeah, they're at war in those places, in Syria, but so I look at the news and okay, God, how does this apply to where we are today in America? How does this United Nations situation deal with here? How does war in this country here affect us? How does our relationship with China? And there's a lot of information in Canada right now about Chinese soldiers, about things in Vancouver, British Columbia, that you can find in newspapers, you can find in journals and articles, around Canada. That I look at that and I think, wow, Lord, that confirms not just dreams, that confirms the word of God about where we'll be, and nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. We're already seeing that right now. You've got Turkey making all sides of amends with Greece. You've got India going at it with China, and India going at it with Pakistan. That's kingdom against kingdom, not just nation against nation. And a lot of people don't see that. I do, because you realize you got 2 ideological differences in political background and power, and we're seeing those things happen right now in various places around the world. And to me, it's exciting. So when I read the headlines, I don't get down and depressed. I don't read the newspaper headlines and think, oh man, this is awful. I think, Lord, I see you in this. I see Scripture. I see stuff from the prophets, both major and minor, and because you're seeing things that are happening. And Jesus said, when you see these signs, I'm seeing signs. So I'm reading the news that I'm seeing through the grid of Scripture, and Scripture becomes my guide for it. Scripture becomes my way of saying, okay, this lines up with the Word, this does not, I can push that one aside. So in that sense, it's pretty exciting where we are on the biblical timeline.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's great. I think, we're all growing in this area, and I believe that I've talked to some people that are, you know, giants or generals in the prophetic community about some of this stuff. And some of them have seen dream interpretations that I've done specifically for them, or they've seen a copy of the dossier. And a couple have made a comment that this is like the next level. This is the next level of what it looks like. And I'm not trying to be next level anything. I just want to know the information. I have that insatiable desire to know what the answer is, and to not accept the surface level.
Yeah.
And so I feel like dream interpretation has, once you kind of get in your mind and you understand that these are coded messages from God, they're secrets of the kingdom of heaven to his children who he loves, then you really begin to want to position yourself in such a way that you can hear one of the primary ways, if not the primary way, that he speaks to the average human being. And so that's why I've dug into to the point of being different than regular dream interpretation, to the point of doing what I call intelligence analysis, studying, reading books on intelligence analysis, finding out what people in the secular community of the intelligence sector are doing and how they control things like cognitive bias, so they don't get one idea and run with it on every single thing, and then they try to continuously confirm the same wrong idea, how to have a fresh perspective and look at every piece of information, in light of everything else, but as an individual piece as well. Yeah. And so we are seeing a depth, and I'm not the only one. There's other people. There's people writing books on spiritual intelligence. There's people that are doing some other incredible things. But I feel like it's this time, like you said, God is pouring out a spirit. Sons and daughters are prophesying. Dreams and visions are happening. And so why wouldn't he want us to be able to discern with a much deeper level of accuracy what that looks like?
Right. And that's where I think the church needs to be. And in some sense, there are people that are afraid of that. I'm hearing, I'm a Pentecostal. I'm a classical Pentecostal. But I'm hearing from people from non-Pentecostal backgrounds that are saying, we've never been taught that these things happen. We've never been taught about the Holy Spirit. We've never been taught about discernment. We've never been taught about dreams or visions. We've never really been taught a whole lot about the prophets and how they worked. We've never been taught what God wants to do in the end days, in last times, last days, whatever, how you want to say it. And so I've got them saying, I want more, I want more, I want more. I'm hearing that every day, every single day. I'm doing this prayer focus every single morning, praying to the Psalms. John, every day I'm getting messages from people saying, hey, where do I go to find out about the baptism of the Holy Spirit? Where do I go to find out about dream interpretation? Where do I go to? Because I've never heard anybody talk or preach about this. People want my notes on the dreams and visions that I was doing, and it was just a loosely laid out. I'm developing that to get more accessible and a little bit more professional in that sense. But people are hungry because they know there's more, and they're also bugging the daylights out of their pastors. Hey, will you preach and teach on this? There's another friend of mine who deals with prophecy, end time events all the time, and he has told me specifically. He said pastors are scared to death to talk about end time events because people don't want to hear it in the church setting. Well, I understand what he's saying, but what I'm hearing, what I'm sensing, my phone has not stopped ringing. My emails have not stopped coming in. I'm telling you, people are hungry to know what's going on right now, and not just in the church in America, but they want to know what God is doing. What's he saying? What's happening? How does prophetic word fit into this? And that's why the church we have got to grip this moment and run with it. And we've got to know what we're doing. We've got to be able to run clearly and safely. But there are people who are hungry right now. And because God's moving in the prophetic and moving in the dreams and moving in that area, people are starting to say, this is what I've been looking for. This is what I've been waiting for, And so I'm excited to be a part of that. And I only stepped into this part in the last 3 months, and I'm still finding my footing. But there's a lot more people that are starting to have dreams, a lot more people that are starting to have an understanding that there's more, and there's a hunger. And I thank God that there is a hunger in the last days as we see America coming to some very, very distinct conclusions as far as decisions that will be made, elections that will be made, and the direction we go as a nation. And God, I believe God is speaking and doing dreams and visions and prophetic word today like he is, because he understands the weight and the seriousness, the absolute necessity of us being able to hear his voice, know and discern what God is saying and doing in our nation. And he's given us responsibility to pray and to seek his face. And he's warned us, not just through brace yourself, but through the word, to be ready, because these things are coming. And if we're not ready for it, we'll get steamrolled. And I've been bracing myself for a couple of years in my mind, but the dreams have also, they have exponentially pushed me and encouraged me to make sure that back leg is locked, make sure I'm leaning forward. And no matter what hits me, they're going to knock me down. I know it's coming, but I want to be standing when the storm gets by me. And there may be parts of me that are broken. There may be parts of me that are weary and tired, but I want to be able to stand when it's all done and say, okay, I'm glad I was braced for that. So
Yeah. Wow. That's so good. That's so good. And that's the purpose of why he tells his friends secrets, is he wants us to know, he wants to share with us
Yeah.
what's coming. So, one of the things we talked about last time is there's a point in the dream where the local bank president tells you that the US Mint stopped printing coins.
Yeah.
Well, last week, I think we talked about how I looked up to see if that was true. There's an article that we've included in the last video um, where the San Francisco Mint did shut down during COVID. West Point shut down for a couple of days and then resumed. But West Point was highlighted as the anomaly. I pressed into that, found it was the longest occupied military base in U.S. history. George Washington put a friend of his, General Benedict Arnold, in charge of the base and basically said that West Point was so strategic that West Point was the hinge point of the Revolutionary War. If we lost West Point, we would lose the Revolutionary War, and thus there would not be a nation. That was the significance of the strategic value of West Point.
Yeah.
Well, we've heard of Benedict Arnold, and we've heard of him being associated particularly with the word treason. I didn't know until I started looking this up that what happened is Benedict Arnold actually tried to sell West Point, the most strategic base in the Revolutionary War, to the British, which I was just amazed. And as I dug into the story, there was another confirmation. There's like 16, 17, 22 different confirmations of a particular person in the modern world that we believe a lot of these symbols are related to. And that's the selling out of the land, the Secretary of State, the female Secretary of State, a person that ran for president but stayed local, somebody that was considered a bank teller because they represented banks or they worked on behalf of banks in a public speaking capacity. Well, in the last video, we didn't mention names, but I don't know how we're going to get out of this one and not mention names. So I want people to know that I don't judge any particular person at all. That's not my job. That's God's job. However, what I do is I look at the symbols and I say, here's what I believe the symbols are telling us. So another symbol related to West Point that I thought was very, very interesting is, do you know what the name of the general on the British side that Benedict Arnold tried to sell West Point to?
Was it Cornwallis?
No, it was actually a general named General H. It was Henry was his first name, but General H. Clinton.
You're kidding.
No, it's that crazy.
Wow.
So there was a General H. Clinton that was associated, was working for the other side, associated with what is considered the biggest selling out of the land in American history, and perhaps the largest, certainly historically, act of treason that we know of. What's interesting is George Washington had set up a spy ring of 6 people. They intercepted. There was a guy that was a go-between between Benedict Arnold and General Clinton on the British side. We caught that person. We hung him for treason, and the deal never happened. Benedict Arnold still became a turncoat, went over to the British side, but he wasn't successful in taking the most strategic base, West Point, with him. And so that stayed in our hands. And possibly because of the intelligence work done with uncovering that plot, that could be the point in which we actually won the Revolutionary War. Because if we had not uncovered that and the West Point would have gone to the British, according to George Washington, it would be a different land that we live in today.
Wow.
So, I think that's interesting. Now, since we know that there is an H. Clinton related to some of the symbols in this dream, again, I don't judge any person. I'm not trying to be political. I'm trying to look strictly at the dream and say, what does it mean? It's interesting that this person that tried to become a president, stayed local, was a bank teller, tells you in the dream that basically they've tossed the coins. They've done away with the coins, pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, half dollars. Well, I felt the need to look up Clinton and tossing the coins. And unbeknownst to me, I had no idea there was any historical significance. Apparently, in the election of 2016, in the Iowa caucus, if there is a tie in a county between two people in the primaries during the caucus stage of the primaries, if there's a tie between two people of the same party, you know how they decide that tie?
Coin toss?
They toss a coin. So Hillary Clinton was tied with Bernie 6 times in Iowa, 6 different times. So they had 6 different coin tosses. You know what the results of those coin tosses were?
I'm afraid to even guess.
Hillary won all 6 times.
Wow.
Statistically, that's like 1 in 32 odds that
Yeah.
can happen. It's next to, it borderlines on the impossible. Like with odds like that, you should be going to Vegas. I'm telling you, it's
Wow.
just amazing to me, which raises the question. And again, this is not my analysis, but a lot of people felt that Hillary Clinton intentionally cheated Bernie out of the presidential nomination during the last election. And there's evidence to that. Again, I don't want to get into the speculation of
Right.
investigative reporting or anything like that. What my job is to stick with the intelligence in the dreams. But in this dream, you have this person that we believe could very well represent Hillary Clinton, talking about how they're tossing the coins. And I look up this reference to Clinton and tossing the coins. And there's this historical fact that happened in 2016. You know, there's another part of this dream that is a kind of a throwback to some of your other dreams, and I want to get into this real quickly, is as she says, there's no pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, half dollars. You say, how can I charge $1.50 for anything? She says, prepare for hyperinflation, just charge $2. But then as you're getting ready to leave, she says, and by the way, the 1s and 5s will follow. Well, it's interesting that on the $1 and the $5 bill is George Washington and Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
What's also interesting is I believe it was June 3rd, which was a day that was significant because when you, in the first or second dream, when it got to June, it tapped June 3 times. I went and I looked up the headlines on June 3rd, and I believe it was actually on that day that both the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. was defaced, and the statue of George Washington in, I believe it was Portland or Seattle, they wrapped an American flag around his head, lit it on fire, and pulled the statue down. Now, when I saw that symbol, the 1s and 5s will follow soon, what I heard is they will no longer be honored as legal tender. And on the same day, a day that was highlighted in one of your other dreams, June 3rd, and maybe it didn't happen that day, but maybe it was in the newspaper that day, in the headlines that day. I forget which. I'd have to go back and look up the article. But anyway, both Abraham Lincoln and his memorial and George Washington and a statue of his were both not honored. You know, they're no longer honored. And we've seen that not just in one or two places. We've seen people begin to question the legacy of Abraham Lincoln and the legacy of George Washington, and just really an attack on some of the greatest founding fathers that this country have known, that have made this country what it is today, both that have stood for freedom and fought wars. And Lincoln even losing his life at the very end of the Civil War for his stance that he took in freedom in this land.
Yeah.
I just think that that's interesting, a historical view related to the 1s and 5s.
That is. I'm wondering if we should call each other every day to make sure we're still alive, because the trail of bodies from the past and other situations. So I'll call you tomorrow morning, make sure you're still after this it goes live. But that's very interesting. And see, once again, you're looking at the history and the background, you're pulling these things out that make perfect sense now as you look at the dreams. I never would have thought that, saw that, or connected that, but you did, which means God's helping us to find out what's in the dreams and what they mean specifically, and not what everybody thinks they mean. We're down to the brass tacks of this is the literal meaning of what these dreams are in that sense, and how they connect to history and the thing, and connect with the steps that we're taking in the future as a nation. So.
Yeah, well, there's another just interesting tie-in. She tells you prepare for hyperinflation. When I looked up hyperinflation, because I wanted the exact definition of what it is, I realized that there's a medical condition called hyperinflation, where the lungs overinflate due to an illness or damage causing chronic shortness of breath. And I thought, how ironic when there's protests with people all over the nation with signs up saying, I can't breathe, and wearing masks at the same time. And I thought, man, what if prepare for hyperinflation meant the actual literal medical condition of there being a respiratory illness in our land during this time, and the detriment potentially that masks can cause, as well as the protesters holding up the sign, I can't breathe. And then you add into that the other layer of the fires on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And you're like, man, this is just crazy. Again, my thought initially when I read the dream is it's a financial dream. It's about financial stuff. But there's so much more depth that's not just about financial stuff. And there's too many confirmations that it's just accident.
Yeah. Well, when I think back and I look at the dreams, I know the feeling I had when I woke up after all three dreams. I know the concern I had in my spirit to get this out. I know the questions I had, because I've been dreaming since I became a Christian at 15, but never anything like this. And yes, I do read a lot of newspapers and you know, headlines basically. I connect the dots. I try to. I keep up what's happening in the country. I keep up what's happening with other nations that connect to us. But being able to sit down with you and watch you unpack this, it helps me to have a better feeling about the dreams too. I mean, I'm the one that had them. I put them out there, and I have people cannot imagine. I've had people say, "Oh, I know what you're going through." No, most people don't. The chaos this brought, you know, I just told you before I got in here, I've had people, you know, hijacking the PayPal account that I have, my personal PayPal account, trying to copy it. And so now I've got to call PayPal and get that all straightened out. And I've had 7 fake YouTube accounts and 46 fake Facebook accounts, and people asking for money and saying it's me, and those challenges. But you doing what you've done has also given me a lot more confidence, not just in having more dreams should the Lord give them to me, but makes me feel a whole lot better about the dreams I'm having, because, you know, and people may not realize this, but I had the dreams and I shared them because I felt I had to. I did not understand any of the dreams to the depth that you have, who, you know, someone who works in dream interpretation, who works with these areas, who's done this for a long time. And so you as the interpreter are helping me as the dreamer feel a whole lot more confident about what I'm dreaming. And so that aspect alone has helped me to go ahead and come out with some of their dreams, because there have been times I've had dreams like the Statue of Liberty dream. I'll be honest with you. I knew when I put that out there, people were going to go crazy. And I've probably been sent, and this is no joke, 400 different interpretations of what that dream means. And some say it's the church, and some say it's America, and some are glad that the idol of the Statue of Liberty is being cast down and torn down and broken. I saw it as an American, watching that symbol that represented what this country was as a freedom-bearing place. I got a letter this week calling me a racist pig because in my first video I said I'm a patriot, I love this country. And so, unsigned and no return address. But all because I said I love my country, they're like, well, you love the slave-owning founding fathers and this and that. And I hate that, because that's not what I love about this. I love America. I love the freedoms. I've been to 43 countries. I've been to places where you have no free speech. You can't carry a weapon. You can't protect or defend yourself. You have no electoral. Remember several years ago in Iraq, the people who were showing up and showing their fingers that were dyed with the blue because for the first time in their lifetime, they were allowed to vote. Man, that to me, it brought tears in my eyes, because that's something we take for granted here sometimes. So when I had that Statue of Liberty dream, knowing what you had done with the dossier helped me to know, okay, people are going to hate me for this or hate the dream, but I could put it out there because I knew I had people like you who could look at it and make a whole lot more sense out of it than I did. And rather than me try to, well, here's what this dream means and this and that, and I'll comment on that. God does want people to step up to the plate and to pray and to seek God, want to see his face. In Exodus, there's a chapter where God speaks to Moses, and he tells the son of Israel, of the Hebrews, he said, I'm not going to fight all your enemies in the promised land for you. You've got to learn to fight for yourself. And for too long in the church, people were good enough just to have milk. They didn't want the meat. They didn't want to chew it down. They didn't want to have to study on their own. And now we're at a place where the church needs greater discernment than it's ever needed before, and to hear the voice of God. And the majority of believers, a lot of believers, are not willing to be with the Lord, even hear his voice or discern it's his voice at all. And so, Paul in Corinthians said that Satan transforms himself into an angel of light. Paul said that we're not ignorant of his devices, but man, in the church world, a lot of people are. And so God's trying to wake us up, get us in the Word, get our prayer lives back to strength, back to strong, have discernment, practice those things, because he wants us to be able to hear those things and not be afraid or terrified, but say, okay, God, what does this mean to me? What you've spoken to this dream or to this prophetic word, what does this mean? God, show me what it means. Instead of saying, oh, hey, Pastor Dana, what does this mean? What's this mean? God wants us to learn how to fight for ourselves. He wants us to learn how to pray and hear what God's saying about certain things. And so I'm hoping that through all of this, with the dreams that are popping up all over the place, that it wakes the church up to greater maturity and depth, because we need depth today. We need people who are deep in the Word, not the inch-high people who have theology that they've gotten out of books. We need people who know the Word, who stand on the Word, who preach and teach the Word, because therein will lie the hope that we have and the defense of the gospel that we have. And we won't be terrified and afraid. When Paul said, God's not giving us a spirit of fear, he was speaking to a young pastor who in that Greek and Roman culture was preaching a gospel that most of those people had never heard before. And there was a lot of pushback. Some of the Caesars, they demanded worship. They demanded to be worshiped and praised. And so he was telling this young pastor to preach the word. He said, be in season, out of season. Don't be afraid to stand up and preach the gospel truth, because it's got to be preached. And so that's what we got to have in the church world. And I believe persecution is coming. I believe martyrdom is coming. And that's why I believe the Lord's trying to wake people up and say, hey, brace yourself, get stronger, get ready. So the brace yourself, as you mentioned, Esther, is primarily spiritual. Because if we're where we need to be spiritually, everything else will fall in place,
Yeah, man, I love you're showing your pastor's heart, man. I love that about you, and the opportunity that I've had to meet with you a couple of times and to share meals with you and to talk with you at length, and the hours that we've unpacked different dreams and things. I mean, I just love the humility that you have and the pastor's heart for other people that you have. And, coming from a desire, not to be known at all, but just to see people ready to not be hurt when whatever's coming comes, and to have that clear sound that people would know, and there wouldn't be so much fake news, even in the prophetic community, that there would be a clear sound. And I have that same desire. Like, there needs to be a clear sound. What is God saying? What is verifiable? What is actionable? What does it look like? And as he continues to pour out his spirit and people dream more and have more visions, I believe that, we're calling all of us to a higher level. I'm diving in deeper because I want to see the skill set that God has given me in spiritual intelligence and dream interpretation go to another level. But at the same time, I think we should all have the desire that if we really believe that God himself is speaking to us, if we really believe that, then why isn't there, or why couldn't there be, a full-time intelligence agency that advises the President of the United States?
Yeah.
Like, we need to have a skill set that is so finely sharpened and finely tuned, and the courage to go with that and the character to match that, that we know that if we were called in to give an answer to heads of state on a dream, a vision, a prophetic word, what is God saying in this confusing time? What do we do? From somebody that runs a country, that we would be 100% confident, not in necessarily our ability, but our ability to hear from God and to give an answer that doesn't include, something that's soft and fuzzy and kind of, foggy on the outside, but very clear direction. Yes, do this, change this policy, do that, go in this direction. And we would know that we know that we know, because of our history with God, that we've seen this stuff happen before and we've gotten it right.
Yeah. And I think also, and I've done this in my church and in my prayer life, I've been praying for President Trump to have dreams. that drive him to the point that he has to ask somebody to interpret it. I've been praying for the Prime Minister in England. I've been praying for the Queen of England to have dreams. I've been praying for Prince Charles to have dreams. I've been praying for Benjamin Netanyahu. You name a leader, and I can tell you, I've been praying that God gives them dreams so that they go to somebody and say, I need a man or woman of God who can tell me what this means. Because think about that. If God spoke through the Pharaoh and God spoke to Nebuchadnezzar, these were heathen leaders. And yet God spoke to them and gave them a glimpse of what was coming. And the answer came from men of God who trusted they trusted the Lord to show them, in one case, both the dream and the interpretation. And I am just Pentecostal enough and biblical enough to believe that God can still do that today.
Absolutely.
So I pray, Lord, give President Trump dreams that lead him to somebody to say, I need a man of God. I need a woman. I need people who can dream and interpret these things, because I had a dream that troubled me. That troubled Nebuchadnezzar enough, he was going to kill everybody who couldn't tell him what it was. So it troubled him. He was emotionally distraught because God showed him something, and he desperately wanted to hear and see what it meant. And because of that, he was like, well, if nobody can tell me, I'm going to kill them all. I'll find somebody else. I mean, think about the passion. I mean, whatever the dream was that God gave him, it burdened him. It pushed him. And Nebuchadnezzar pursued an answer. And that answer could only come from a man of God. So I'm praying that those things continue to happen. I pray that on a daily basis. I really do. And I'm believing God's going to give those key leaders. I pray for senators. I pray for governors to have dreams, because we need our leaders having dreams today that require a man or a woman of God to step up and say, I know what this is, and here's what it is.
Right. Right. And I pray that God encounters everybody, all, like you said, all the leaders, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, like everybody, that God would encounter them in their dreams. And we've seen it all over, different parts of the world, in particular, parts that aren't necessarily friendly to Christianity, where God has encountered people who have never heard of God, never heard of Jesus before, in their dreams, and then they get saved, and they have this massive encounter, and they come into contact with him. And I think that's amazing. And I think, even the church, unfortunately, has been divided politically during this electoral session, for sure. But I think, you look at the beauty of a Daniel or a Joseph, who were prisoners of war, who were sold into slavery, who weren't serving necessarily a king that honored God. And people can say whatever they want about current people in different political positions. My challenge to us is if you had a leader that you didn't like, and you 100% believe that they were doing evil to even your own country, but you were in a position to consult with them and to give them advice based on the word of God or your ability to hear from God, would you do that? And that's one of the challenges that I look at in my own life a lot. Man, it doesn't, to me, I want to be careful how I say this. Obviously, I have opinions on how I would like to see the country run, and I would like to see it run with a biblical worldview. But to me, no matter who was president, no matter who it was, I would hope that myself and others would be in a position that if that person did have a dream or a vision, they could come to us and we could discern rightly the word of the Lord, and we could present it to them, and they would have actionable intelligence on how to proceed for the benefit of our country. Yeah.
And just like Joseph said, here's the dream, here's what they mean, and here's what you do or you need to do. That is, and that's more than just actionable intelligence. That's the mercy of God speaking to a nation. And Joseph's family was impacted by the fact he interpreted a dream and then gave Pharaoh the right amount of wisdom to know what to do with it. It brought his family back together, a family he hadn't seen, for many, many years. And so in that sense, the interpretation of that dream was also personal, but it was also national. And look how good that made Pharaoh look in the people's eyes. Because he basically, because he listened to Joseph, Pharaoh could say, hey, I saved the lives of many. There was a famine, a full-fledged famine. And now Pharaoh can take credit, so to speak, because he had a dream and he found together an interpreter, and he did what the interpreter said he should do. Wow. And it saved the nation. And it saved the people, So that was a huge thing, a huge thing. And sometimes we overlook that because all we see, well, people got to eat. No, it was bigger than that. And it was so big, in fact, that that's recorded in the book of Genesis by Moses for us to have that story to know about, that God's a provider. And all that happened because of a supernatural dream that God gave Pharaoh, and he couldn't get it out of his head. So
That's amazing.
it is. It is. It is. It is.
Well, I think we should tell them the punchline. I think we've gotten all the way to the point where there's no way around it now. We have to say this is what we believe. I want people to know that both you and I have had extensive talks about what this dream means and what the implications are, and even what the implications are of going public with what we believe God is saying in this dream. And I don't have confidence in my ability. I have confidence that, as Daniel and Joseph said, the interpretation comes from him. This is something that we approached over an extended period of time. Again, you released your dreams at the end of June. I first finished this dossier August 2nd, hadn't released it to some key leaders to get their opinions and their thoughts and what should we do with this, put it in the hands of some people that are governmental advisors so they would have the information. And then that tension that we hold in the intelligence world of what is news that everybody should know on one hand, and what is stuff that only people that are in a position to act on said information, what should they know? There's so many people praying for this election, and I believe this election is critical. So here's what we believe the dream means. At the very end of the dream, when she said no change available, you asked the question, how do I charge $1.50 for anything? Now, she had just said there's no pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, half dollars. And we know that that meant the change represented by the lives of those people, if that person would have their way, or that particular party would have their way, would likely be canceled. But you said, how do I charge $1.50? She said, prepare for hyperinflation and just charge $2. So the only piece of currency that she actually advocated for in the entire dream was $2. And so I felt like the Lord said, look up the $2 bill. I didn't know who was on the $2 bill. I was surprised to find that it was Thomas Jefferson. So didn't know a lot about Thomas Jefferson, knew a little bit, but as I began to look into who Thomas Jefferson was, he was the author of the Declaration of Independence. He was the very first Secretary of State. I'm like, well, that's interesting. He was the first Secretary of State to run for president. I'm like, wow, that sounds familiar. He was the first Secretary of State to run for president and lose in the Electoral College. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Because the person that we believe is represented by the secretary and the local bank president is the first lady that became Secretary of State, and then the first lady that became Secretary of State and ran for president, and the first lady that became Secretary of State, ran for president, and lost in the Electoral College. And this is when you're just at the point where, like, you can't even make this stuff up. Like, this is just crazy. Well, what happens is the next term, Thomas Jefferson lost to John Adams in 1796. And in the election of 1800, he ran again. So first Secretary of State to run for president, lose in the Electoral College, and then run in the next term, which was really interesting because this is where spiritual intelligence comes in. There's multiple other dreams that I can point to. One that we had all the way back at the day of the Iowa caucus in February that I didn't understand, and I notified a few people in government positions about it, but it didn't make a lot of sense to me until I studied and saw how this could happen, was the idea that Hillary Clinton, by November 3rd, actually by the third debate, it would be Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. And again, I went through, when I first heard that piece of information, and I was just looking strictly at the symbols in a dream, I said, but she's not running. There's 13 candidates in the Democratic field. She's not in the primary. There's no way this and this. And then I started researching, and I thought, well, maybe, particularly looking at Biden's potential cognitive decline, that they would have what they call a contested convention. At the convention, they decide, we're going to shelve Biden, we're going to bring somebody else in, this is what's going to happen. And so in my thinking, it was like, well, maybe they're going to have a contested convention and bring out Hillary at close to the last minute. Well, that didn't happen. There's been continued talk about Biden's ability to be able to run. There's another dream that you had that we're going to get into further about the covered wagon. And again, there's 4 or 5 other dreams. Some are from people that are in very high political positions that they've sent to me. Some are from prophetic voices in other countries that have alluded to the idea that when it comes down to, and I believe the timing is by the symbols that I've seen, and I'm okay being wrong, but I have to, this is what I believe. By the symbols that I've seen in multiple dreams, by October 22nd, the 3rd debate, Belmont University in Nashville, it will be, Biden will have been replaced by the new candidate for the Democratic Party. I believe it'll be Hillary Clinton, and I believe it'll be Hillary Clinton versus President Trump come November 3rd. Now, this brings in a whole bunch of other issues, like what about mail-in ballots? What about people that already voted? What about, and these are questions that we don't have an answer to. But what I also felt through this dream, through the series of dreams that you've had, is I believe that the symbols in the dream are saying that every single thing this year that we've seen is part of a coordinated, put together plan by certain people in power to usurp the election process intentionally, to bring in somebody that didn't run in the primaries, to shelter them through all of the attacks from an incumbent president, to bring them in at the very last minute and to cause as much confusion as possible, because I believe this parallels the election of 1800. What happened 220 years ago in the election of 1800 is when Thomas Jefferson ran, there was so much shenanigans with newspaper editors. They were throwing in jail because they had, they had different laws back then, and just all kinds of stuff that was happening. There was so much confusion sewn into the election process, and a lot of it was done intentionally. But when the vote was counted, there wasn't a majority. And so they said that, which means somebody didn't win over 50%. And so what happened is it went to a House vote. They had to vote 36 times in the House before they decided who would actually be president. And there were a lot of backroom deals that were made in order for Thomas Jefferson to actually win that scenario. So I believe everything from the protests in the street, the masks, the misinformation related to all of the events that's been happening this year, the fear, lock people in homes, take away the rights of churches, all of this stuff has created an air of distraction so that if something happens to Biden in the next 2 weeks and he has to be taken out and somebody else brought in, people will say, well, of course it's 2020. This is unprecedented in American politics. There's never been a nominee that wasn't after the convention that's been replaced. It's never happened. I believe very much so that the dreams are saying that it could happen this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if it does. At this point, I think I'd almost be surprised if it didn't happen that way, because there's been too many confirmations. Now, you look at that with the mail-in ballots, and you realize how many lawsuits there are going to be in different states related to people contesting the results of the election, which again, you've seen in other dreams. The results of the election are contested. And I believe that all of that is by design, specifically so they can send it to a vote in the House. They'll have to enact the 12th Amendment, which was put in place after the election of 1800 because of the confusion that was made.
Yeah.
And the election will be divided. It will be decided in the House. Now, before a lot of people kind of freak out about that result, the way that it's decided in the House is by state delegation, which means if your state has 3 representatives to cut to the House of Representatives, those 3 representatives get together and say, who are you voting for? And if 2 of them vote Democrat and 1 votes Republican, then the single vote for that state goes to the Democratic side. Now, even though there's a Democratic majority in the House right now, the vote would not be decided until the new House is sworn in, which would be after the first of the year. So we don't even know, because we don't know the results of this election and all the congressional seats tied to this election, what the majority situation would be. It could flip to the Republicans, it could stay the Democrats. But even if it's a straight majority, it doesn't matter. What matters is the majority in each state by state delegate, and then assuming a straight party line vote. So I believe this is, if nothing else, this is at least a contingency that I believe that the radical left has to try to guarantee their position come the election. If they don't win straight outright, there's enough chaos and fear that has been sown in that we can go to court, that we can test this process,
Right.
And hopefully have either a tie declared or a non-majority, or a situation where it's still in flux that they have to send it to a House for the House to decide.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. I can see that.
So hence the words, brace yourself. Because if that happens, it's never happened before. It would cause a lot of fear. It would cause a lot of people who don't even understand what I just said about the electoral process to feel like things were out of control, to feel like our country is being stolen and people are trying to manipulate us. And that very well may be the case. But the fact of the matter is if your internal game is your eyes are focused on God, your mind is in the Word, you've prepared yourself for the eventuality that things that you may not believe, things that may be shocking to you, you're going to see, and they're going to happen this year, may happen, then guess what? It's not going to throw you into a tailspin.
Right.
We're going to be prepared for it, which again is why I think it's so important. The words that you keep hearing over and over and over again, which we name the dossier, the brace yourself dossier, because those are the words. And it goes back to those 5 scripture verses, which have to do with not being afraid. They will fight against you. They will not win. I am with you. I have made you a fortified city, a bronze pillar and an iron, or a bronze wall and an iron pillar. These promises of God that are in his word, that he is with us. But wait, there's more, because that's not how the dream ends. The dream ends with her saying, we won't have $1, you can't make change for $1.50, just charge $2. So I looked up all of this about the $2 bill, and I felt like what's happening is they're trying to recreate the scenario that happened during the election of 1800. And I said, but what does this mean for America? Is this plan going to succeed? And I want to talk about what I call the setup, the dark strategy, the dark horse candidate or the dark horse nominee, and then basically the outcome. So the setup, here's what I believe the setup is. Part 1 and part 2, brace yourself, part 1 and part 2, which would be dream 1 and dream 2 in this first video, they're all connected. And they provide, first of all, they provide source and authenticity verification. The dreams are from God. The first dream in particular has a proven track record of displaying images of events that we have seen presented in the media. They show us patterns of how God is speaking in months, days, headlines, media images, and events that have been observed through them, and how there's been a carefully orchestrated media presentation of fear. Again, we saw that through the vultures. We saw that through the gargoyles. We saw that through so much where it's palatable fear that a lot of people have because of the chaos that's going on in our country right now. The images of fear, they also come as chaos. They come as smoke. They come as the protests in the streets, people firing wildly in all directions, which means they don't know what to do. They feel helpless. Some are disengaged and hiding in homes. Some are out protesting in the streets. But what happens is our hearts are going to be revealed if and when this eventuality happens. We're going to know right away who's braced and who's not. We're going to know whose eyes are on Jesus and who's freaking out because they don't know if they have enough ammo, and at the end of the day, it's going to be like, what are we trusting in? And what are we going to know? Our hearts are going to be revealed. All of the images described in the first two dreams, and this is my personal thoughts. I don't claim this to be your thoughts, Dana. We certainly want to hear your thoughts at the end. But my thoughts are that everything we see is indicative of a carefully orchestrated series of events, specifically to distract, deceive, and to create fear. And the reason is because there's a dark strategy behind it with some underlying issues, and it's related to the election. Again, the second dream that you had, when the finger appeared and it underlined November 3 times, what I heard then is November 3rd, the election is the underlying issue. Now, the first two dreams weren't about the election at all. They were about current events we saw in the first 6 months of this year, and then the rest up to November 3rd, when God intervenes, the fist punches on the calendar. But what I'm hearing is all of these dreams, and again, another reason for spiritual intelligence. If you look at this a dream at a time, you miss the patterns of how all the dreams can come together. If I only look at Dana's 3 dreams and I don't listen to any dreams that other people are having, then I don't get the outside opinion that can just confirm particular sources. But that's why this is an intelligence analysis that has been done on these dreams, looking at historical pieces, lives, events, but also looking at other modern day things and other dreams and other ways that God is speaking to people.
Yeah.
So here's what we believe the dark strategy is. We kind of let it, I kind of let it out of the bag. We believe that there's been a disinformation campaign, particularly portrayed in the media, that change well-established norms in the election cycle. It's interesting because I forgot about that. I said that, and I published this to a few people August 2nd. So one of the norms that has been changed, which we didn't know back then that it was completely changed, was mail-in voting. But another one is now they're talking about not having a third. I think they decided they're not going to have the second debate, right?
Yeah.
You know,
As of right now, yeah.
that's a well-established presidential election norm that has been thrown off. And initially it was like, we'll do it virtually. And then Trump said, I'm not going to do it virtually. And all of that is changing well-established norms that have been, some for hundreds of years, have been the standard in this country. And it's because of the crazy stuff that's going on this year, but not even because of the craziness of the events that's happening, but the craziness because of the news that we're getting is constantly, I believe, propaganda, negative stuff, fear. I'm not going to get into what I think is real and what isn't. It doesn't matter. What matters is there's an environment intentionally created to cause fear and confusion so that if something strange happens in the midst of this election process, we're just going to blame it on the fact that it's 2020. Right?
Yeah, that about sums it up.
So here's what we think is going to happen. We believe that there's going to be a dark horse candidate come in at the last minute on the Democratic side. We believe it's going to be Hillary Clinton. We believe that they're going to try to, I don't know what's going to happen to Biden. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be a cognitive thing, a medical thing. I feel like there's going to be a failure that's so public that people on both sides of the aisle are going to say, you got to get this guy out of here. He can't run our country. He can't be the nominee. And somebody is going to have to step in an unprecedented fashion and several weeks before the final election, change who the two candidates are. And again, I believe that this could be, by the symbols in the dream, it could be a part of a coordinated strategy from the beginning of the year to end up in this place at this time. So I'm just going to go briefly over, I have 16 reasons listed why I believe that that person is former Secretary Clinton. One, the secretary with international implications, the Secretary of State. Two, the reference to the yard sale. There's been allegations against her and that family that they've sold out the land. Again, I'm not making judgments on them or on what they've done or haven't done or what's been alleged or investigated. I'm just saying, if it's been said about somebody in history and it's been said about somebody here, there's a symbolic link between those two parties. Number three is betrayal. Now, again, it was alleged that they sold out Bernie in 2016 to win the nomination. Again, I'm not passing judgment. I'm just saying the allegation itself provides a link to the symbol of betrayal, the 30 pieces of silver, the 40 pieces of silver, the inflationary part of that we didn't really go into that, but it's in the dossier. The 6 coin tosses won in Iowa against Bernie in 2016, the tossing of the coins, again, in her favor. The funding of a team, the Republic of Dividing Line, creating division, identity politics, and Clinton Foundation. Again, there's been allegations of the Clinton Foundation and other foundations being behind a lot of the protests that we see in the streets. That would be the pre-dream part when they said we're raising funds to send a team to the Republic of Invisible Dividing Line, or the Republic of Civil War. There are forces that's pretty obvious that want to see this country torn apart, and they're funding people to be at certain places to protest at the right time. Again, I'm not passing judgment on movements. I'm not passing judgment on individuals, or even individuals that may or may not be doing this. I'm saying there is a symbolic link between one person and all of the symbols in this dream. No change for the sale of the land. America did not benefit. There's multiple articles about passing judgment on Hillary Clinton's job as Secretary of State. You can look them up and you can read them. But the idea that no change is available would fall in line with those articles. Female president. She was the first major party presidential nominee. Local bank president. She wanted to be president. She stayed local. Her last position, official position, other than a candidate for the presidency of the United States, was U.S. Senator from the state of New York. Acting bank teller. Whitewater, where she represented the banks, and there was a conflict of interest there, allegedly. And the speaking at major events, which that link is, we're including that link. You can see it. You can see it here in this video. Failed to provide change as a local bank president, both as Secretary of State and as a New York senator. The change that people would have liked to have seen brought in those positions of authority, some would allege has been lacking. No change available. Again, three former campaign slogans that were part of the Obama campaign, and she was part of her cabinet, can include the word change. 40 pieces of silver in Nehemiah 5. References to the former administration, which she played a role in. The 30 pieces of silver was a reference to Judas and the betrayal. And it's interesting that you said, how do I charge $1.50? She said, prepare for hyperinflation and just charge $2. That's a 33% increase. 33% of $1.50 is 50 cents plus that's $2, right? That's the same level of increase as 30 pieces of silver that Judas was given for the betrayal of Jesus to 40 pieces of silver that we saw in Nehemiah. It's the exact same 33% increase, or the inflation of 33%, which is interesting. New York State Senator, which is the home of West Point. It's the home of the U.S. Mint that was temporarily closed due to COVID. I've heard, I haven't verified this, and I don't have a source for this, but I think I could find one, that the hardest hit city in all of the United States, in fact, this is in Jonathan Cahn's book, Harbinger 2, is New York City. And I think New York State may be among the worst hit because of COVID. So that's just an interesting fact. George Clinton was Jefferson's running mate for a second term, and he was a former governor of New York. So not only do we have General Clinton, who was on the British side, who Benedict Arnold tried to sell out the land to, we have George Clinton, who was a running mate, a VP, for the second term of Jefferson, and he was a former New York governor. Again, 2 Clintons in the historical account related to the Thomas Jefferson election of 1800 story. The Jefferson-Clinton ticket ran in 1804. They won in 1800. They ran in 1804 on a strong economy, lower taxes, and the Louisiana Purchase, which is exactly the opposite of the idea of selling out the land. They actually doubled the land mass of the United States with the Louisiana Purchase. So here's a couple of indicators that we have on how this scenario is actually going to play out. Everything that we've talked about so far is what we believe the dream points to being a plan or an agenda in place. Historically, since there's historical events that come into play, the Benedict Arnold plan to sell out the land to General H. Clinton of the British failed. That's number one. So that did not succeed. Again, it goes back to the yard sale, the selling out of the land, and H. Clinton. That was not successful. The connections between Thomas Jefferson and Secretary Clinton are very, very clear, as we've kind of unpacked. What's really interesting is I felt led, and again, thoughts come to my mind. I believe that they're the Holy Spirit. They're unctions that I would not have the thought necessarily on my own. But I felt led specifically to look up the Fed order for currency. What happens is the governors of the Federal Reserve Bank get together. They say, here's how much currency we're going to need in this next year. They send it to the U.S. Treasury. The request for paper money goes to the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, part of the U.S. Treasury. The request for coinage goes to the U.S. Mint, and the Mint prints the coins. And so that's what's put together. Now, it's interesting that there was both an initial order from the Fed, and then there was a modified order this year. Because of COVID, there wasn't as much circulation of the currency, so there was a modified order that went back asking for actually more coins and more dollars to be printed this year, which is exactly opposite of what the bank teller said when they said no change available. It proved to be a lie. In actuality, that both the original order was greater than last year, and the addendum to the original order was greater than the original order itself. So that almost never happens, as far as I know. But it's what the real interesting piece of that is, out of pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, half dollars, and all of the paper money that was printed, there's only one piece of currency in both the original order of the Fed order and the addendum that was not printed this year. Do you know what it was?
$2 bill.
The $2 bill. Which what that tells me is the scenario of the election of 1800, that there would be a Secretary of State, first Secretary of State, ran for president, lost in the Electoral College, runs again, a massive amount of confusion in the electoral process sewn in, so much so that a tie is called and the vote goes to the House, that scenario and that agenda is canceled for this year, and it will not succeed. It will utterly fail. So what I believe that to mean is no matter what happens in the next several weeks to come, I believe that no matter what chaos, what different things happen, what protests may happen, and I don't want to speculate. I just want to stick to the symbols in the dream. I tend to be dogmatic about that because people didn't tune in to hear my thoughts on what I believe the geopolitical climate of the world is. They want to know what the symbols in the dream mean. So that's what I want to provide. I believe it to mean that if there is that agenda that exists, as we see clearly from the symbol in this dream and multiple other dreams, that it will fail utterly. I also believe that to mean that President Trump will be elected to a second term. Not only will this confusion not allow for there to be a House vote, it may go to a House vote, I'm not sure. But the agenda itself to sow all of this confusion in order to guarantee a win, that it will not succeed. And again, this goes back to Dream 2 on November 3rd. The hand of God hits on November 3rd. And I believe that is God's intervention in this nation because of the prayers of the saints and because of all of the people that have come together that have said, God, we need mercy, and we need to continue in a biblical moral path in this country, that is going to be destroyed. So some interesting kind of postscripts on this whole scenario is that after Thomas Jefferson did become president, you look back at again the agenda of Benedict Arnold. He went back and he made West Point the war college for America. So the place that would have been the largest selling out of the land and the biggest piece of treason in American history actually became a place by which we train multiple generations for war ever since. Now, one last piece is, you said at the very end, you said, brace yourself, brace yourself, brace yourself 3 times. Well, the last thing that I saw in the dream is she said the 1 and the 5s will be canceled. I believe that I believe that when she said the only thing that was available was the $2 bill, we see that it's not available in this year, then I'm believing the opposite of what the local bank president said is true. The idea that there won't be change available, there won't be freedom, there won't be civil rights in America, there won't be a death of racism and things like that, that people like JFK and Abraham Lincoln and FDR have worked to end, 3 main wars, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War II, that has been canceled. And when she said the 1s and the 5s would be canceled, I believe that actually what's going to happen is the reverse of that, is there's going to be a return to the establishment of what these 2 men embody, the establishment of our blessed nation, a return back to biblical values, a return to more of a governance in accordance with the ideals of the founding fathers, the Constitution, the Supreme Court, all of that. But the last thing you heard was brace yourself, brace yourself, brace yourself. And I felt led to look at the initials of brace yourself, which was BY. And I heard the song Bye, 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 which was kind of funny. And what I believe it means is that it's a declaration that the people that attempted this agenda, this nefarious election agenda in this year, that we're not going to hear from them anymore. That their positions in public politics and public governance in this nation, because of what's been attempted this year, are gone. They've guaranteed their own retirement. So that's a lot of information. Dana, you had these dreams. What are your thoughts?
I'm still absorbing, digesting, walking through, and I've had the privilege of reading through the dossier. And at least twice a week, I'll go through that document and look at things and compare notes and see where we are, not just in history, but to the day. What's happening in Washington, D.C., what's happening with the debates, what's happening with the idea that there may be some issues with the Democratic presidential candidates' mental capacity. What's been neat to me is to see your revelations about the dream and see the potential for how this plays out, and being able to take the dream that I had and how I saw it and to tie it to the anchor points that you have seen with the revelation about the interpretation of it. I'm still just amazed at the things that you saw, the connections you made, because they all make sense to me. And once again, I know what I saw in the dreams. I know God shared them with me to get out there. And I think a lot of people are going to appreciate this specific podcast, the one that covered Dream 3, because I was not fully aware of the depth of the meaning. And yes, I know, it could all be way different on November 3rd, but God gave me the dreams for a reason. God gave me the warning dreams for a reason, and God told me to tell people to brace themselves for a reason. And I've been obedient to that. And regardless of what happens, I'm not going back on the dreams that I had or sharing them. I can't take them back, and not that I would. But after seeing a lot more things happen in the dreams that we do see in the headlines today, I'm more than willing to say that I think the interpretation is spot on. It's very, very accurate. And probably very, 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 very few other people would have seen all the things that you've connected with it and brought out. So I'm just looking forward to seeing it all play out and being able to breathe after the election. Because I find myself from time to time holding my breath a lot. Because a lot of people have said, well, if nothing of this stuff happens, we're going to make you apologize to the nation on December 1st. And I had a dream, and I shared those dreams. And I never said a lot. There's been a lot of things that they've said I've said. But I know I had dreams from God. And that's my story. I'm sticking with it. And as things play out, we'll see the accuracy, both of the dreams, your interpretation. And I'm ultimately responsible for what I shared, for what I said. And but I'm confident that the Lord, who gave me the dreams, will also see me through whatever consequences may come of what happens or what doesn't happen. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
You know, I love that about you. And I feel like that's something we share is, you know what, we're okay with being wrong. That's part of being a watchman, is you have to raise the alarm, and it's better that you raise the alarm than not raise the alarm. And as it says in Ezekiel, if you don't raise the alarm and the enemy comes to the city and people die, it's on your head.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to stand next to you and apologize if we need to and say, you know what, something was wrong. I can't tell you how much we learn in spiritual intelligence by doing what we call postmortems on dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Like we'll see something happen, like a mass event, particularly a bad event. And then we'll go back and we'll search through the database and see, did anybody see the city? Did anybody see this event? And we'll look at it. And then we'll see, man, there were 4 or 5 dreams pointing to one of the big ones that we got right was a dip in oil. Initially, there was a 20% decline. And at that point, me and my friend Amy, we started searching through a database that we have, and we saw dreams of oil being pumped out of somebody's basement, oil in their toilet, oil that had been dropped to the floor. And at that point, we said, you know what, we should make a report, an intelligence report for the oil and gas industry, letting them know that even though there's been a huge decline in the price of oil, that it's going to drop much, much lower.
Yeah.
And decided at that point, because of schedules and things in our lives, I kind of focused on stuff more related to the election, and she was doing other things as well. Sure enough, it wasn't a month or 2 after that oil was $- a barrel. And we got back on the phone and called each other and said, you know, we were 100% right on what was going to happen. And it's when you see enough of those wins with the specificity of, you know, it's taking a risk. This is what I believe that God is saying, and then taking a risk. And if you get it wrong, going back and saying, God, show me, where did I get it wrong? Did I interpret a symbol wrong? What were you saying? But when you see enough of those put together, it allows you to be able to have a history with God that you can say, here's what I believe this means. And if I'm wrong, it's okay. I've stood in front of people and taught publicly, and people have raised their hand and said, I had a dream, and it was a very sensitive dream, and I gave an interpretation, but I said, hey, I'm okay being wrong. If this doesn't land or doesn't resonate, that particular one did. It was a massive change in that person's life, but it was it was a real difficult situation to speak into. But that's what I see with this here is, you know, we deliver this intelligence briefing with boldness, but kind of in fear and trembling as well. It's not about whether we're right or not. It's not about whether we're popular or not. This is what I've spent time. This is what God showed you. We know from your first dream and from a lot that's already happened in your second dream that it's proven to be true. If anybody questions that, they can feel free to let me know, and I will defend you and say, here are the articles that we've looked up related to these events that you saw in the headlines that have already come to pass. And at the same time, here's what we believe is going to happen coming down the pike here within the next month. And you know, I think we just have the responsibility to call it like we see it, to know that we hear the voice of God in this particular way through dreams, and to say that we're not 100%, we're not always right, but I think God uses people that are kind of new. I'm new in the spiritual intelligence community. Actually, the spiritual intelligence community itself is new, where people are taking multiple dreams and linking them to other events and putting together 38-page dossiers that say, we believe this is the understanding related to history, related to the Bible. This is a whole brand new field. But I believe it's certainly calling me higher, and it's calling a lot of us higher to a different place where we have a hunger to hear from God and to hear from heaven, actionable solutions and intelligence that can make a difference in our day and age.
I'm looking forward to, and I hope people understand what I'm about to say. I want to get better at what I do. I want to hear more clearly. I want to see more clearly. And I want to learn from I want to learn from the things that happen or don't happen. I want to be a more solid spokesman. I want to be a more solid watchman. Because this is still uncharted territory for me. I'm continuing to have dreams, and I find myself not doubting, but wondering, okay, God, what am I seeing now? I don't want to be that guy that just keeps putting dreams out there, unless they mean something, unless they can make changes in people, unless it changes the spiritual nature of some people, unless it encourages people to pray more and to get where they need to the Lord. That's my heart. But I want to do it, just as a pastor. I've done further education. I've done more training. I read books. I want to be a better speaker, a better preacher, a better pastor. And the only way you do that is you learn, you study. I talk to other pastors and friends. What are you doing? What are you learning? What are you shifting on? Where are you at right now? And I want to, and I'm new at this. Watchman, I'm new at this, and so but I want to be the best watchman I can be. And that's another reason I guess maybe why I look at the headlines. I see what's happening around the world, so I can say, hey, I see this coming. I've got folks in my church that tell me, and this you could ask people in the church. I will tell you that they get their news sources from me. They hear things from me because I'm searching it out. I'm looking for it. Because not just because I'm wired that way, but I want to know what's going on. I want to know where I stand and what's happening in history. I want to know what's coming next. And so I use the Bible as my grid to look at history and look at politics and look at the nations and look at the news and see where we are. And so I want to be the most obedient, most Christ-like servant that I can be. And I've taken a lot of hits, a whole lot of hits in the last 3 months. But I've not walked away from that calling. I've not walked away from the inclination, the leaning I have to say what I'm hearing, say what I'm seeing, and share with the church world, share with the nation, share with the lost what's coming. Because I've got a responsibility. I've got to share what I see. And I will be held accountable. I don't want the blood on my hands because I didn't share a dream or didn't say what I see coming. And even before the dreams, as a pastor in the pulpit, I'm a watchman trying to say, folks, here's what's coming, here's what's going down, here's where you need to be. And I got to say, I cannot take that loosely. I have to take it seriously, and I do. So what you've done is also helping me to learn more about a new stage in my life. So I thank you, John, for that very, very much. Very, very much. Thank you.
Well, I thank you for your boldness and your integrity, for the humility that you have. I have been in the rare position of actually spending time with you, sharing meals, having extensive conversations in person as well as on the phone, talking about a lot of dreams, being able to unpack with you. And I just love, I feel like God couldn't have picked a better person. You're not somebody that's seeking a name for yourself, that's trying to be known, that's kind of actually more reticent to, I don't know if I want to put this out there because I know it's going to cause a stir. But I just want to affirm you and say thank you for the boldness. You're a gift to the body of Christ. You're a gift to not just the body of Christ, but people that want to know, that believe that whether you believe it's God or not, if you believe that dreams can mean something, that they are messages from a place outside of ourselves. We believe that those messages come from heaven and they're from God, but there's too much of history we won't get into right now to think that dreams are simply arbitrary. They're not. They're not. History's been rewritten by people that have had dreams, like Einstein, like Bohr, the model of the atom, won the Nobel Prize in physics, and so many others. But you're among few people, I think, in this day and age that came out of nowhere, shared a dream, took a huge risk, shared some dreams that you had. That again, I mean, I'm looking at the landscape of people that are having dreams all over the world right now. And there's some that, I don't have time to do all of them, but there's some that captivate me. And you are one of the few that it was like, we need an interpretation for this. This is hugely important. And again, when I went on this, 3-4 week journey to discern what these dreams meant, I had absolutely no idea this is where they were going. And just each night I'd get a piece of information, a little bit of revelation, a piece at a time, and spend the next several hours reading a book about Benedict Arnold or looking up something about West Point and learning the historical context. Because if God is going to use it as a symbol in a dream, then it's something that I need to know about. And, I want to press in and I want to find the secrets that God has. And so
Yeah.
thank you again. Thank you for taking the boldness and the risk. Thank you for continuing to share with me your dreams and to share with so many of us that are interested to hear what God is speaking through you. And thank you for being willing to put it out there and to have this discussion with those that will listen to this briefing online.
I'm glad to. I really am. Thank you for the time with it.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us for this edition of the Spiritual Intelligence Briefing. There'll be a forum for questions. We'll probably release this through a Facebook group, maybe on YouTube. If you have questions, those would be some things that we would want to know down the road. We can't answer the questions of 10,000 people, but we try to look at the Facebook page that Dana set up and look at the questions about particular things in the dreams. But I just want to encourage you, listen to your dreams, write your dreams down, ask God what they mean, seek out the revelation, because dreams are important and there's intelligence that we can get from dreams that we can get from nowhere else. So thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.